Managers, what was your worst employee like? Story 1. The company I work for is very hard to get hired into, even if you have a great resume or strong recommendation. One day, we got a new client. His business alone could have kept our company running for the next 10 years. He asked if his cousin or young nephew, as he called him, could get an entry-level job with us. We didn't really want to, but because of how important the client was, we agreed. From the start, the kid spent most of his time online looking at fancy cars. When we asked if he finished any of his tasks, he would either say he did, even when he didn't, or claim he didn't know how and didn't want to bother anyone for help. Then he brought all his gaming systems into the conference room, saying they were for clients to play while they waited. That might have been a nice idea, except he just played games in there all day himself. Eventually, we gave him only basic tasks like ordering office supplies or picking up lunch. 2 years passed, and the client told us he was going to let his nephew take over the work he usually gave us and even help the kid start his own consulting firm. Turns out, the kid had been telling his uncle that he was a key part of running our company, which wasn't true at all. 3 months later, the client came back to us. His nephew had tried hiring another consulting firm to secretly do the work for him, just so he could sit around playing video games like Sonic the Hedgehog all day. Story 2. The hardest kind of employee to deal with is someone who doesn't do anything serious enough to be let go, but still manages to make every single day more frustrating. The most difficult person we had at work couldn't focus at all. You had to write down clear instructions for everything, even for tasks he had done many times before. Plus, you had to check in with him every 15 minutes. But surprisingly, when he worked under those conditions, the results were always perfect. Every year, during performance reviews, we debate whether we should keep him or not. And every year, we decided to let him stay. It was one of those situations where you stick with a problem you understand, because at least we knew how to manage him, and he was somewhat predictable. Story 3. We worked as hospital aides on an inpatient floor. Our job was to take care of basic needs, helping patients who couldn't get to the bathroom, checking vital signs, helping them move to and from chairs or beds. The nurses counted on us so they could focus on their tasks. There was one girl who did everything she could to avoid working. She often hid in the back station where no one could see her and sat there reading. She would ignore patient call bells, especially from people who needed a lot of help, and just wait for someone else to answer them. Even though she was only allowed a 30-minute break, she'd often disappear for up to an hour. When she trained a new aide, she encouraged her to avoid work too. One day, she got caught entering fake vital signs into the system. She was mad that she couldn't take her break when she wanted, so she left for 90 minutes. When she came back, she had missed the second round of vitals, so instead of checking on patients, she made up the numbers and entered them into the computer. Normally, we used machines that recorded the vitals and sent them directly to the patient's chart through Wi-Fi, but she typed in random values instead. The mistake was serious. She entered an average blood pressure like 130/85 for a patient whose normal numbers were closer to 90/60. The nurse saw this, thought the patient's blood pressure was too high, and gave medication to lower it. The patient's blood pressure dropped too low, and it became a medical emergency. Luckily, one of the monitor techs realized something was wrong. They pulled data from all the vitals machines used that evening and printed everything. Even though the girl didn't save anything to the system, the machines had stored the real numbers. None of the readings she entered matched the actual ones from the machines. That was proof she hadn't done her job. We honestly had no idea how long she had been doing this without getting caught, especially since she'd often disappear during busy times. Thanks to that tech, the nurse wasn't blamed, and the aide was fired. She wasn't charged, which I still think was a mistake. Our bosses just felt it was too embarrassing and thought firing her was enough. The day she was fired, we had a staff meeting right before the evening shift. She was late, sent to help another unit, and walked off before the bosses could stop her. They called her back, showed her the proof, and she admitted everything. She had to walk back to the other unit to get her purse, then to our unit to clear her locker and get her coat. Security came to collect her ID. The whole time she was crying. She wore a lot of makeup, and it was all over her face. She looked completely shaken. It ended up being a very public and embarrassing moment. Everyone in the small hospital knew what happened. I still think she should have been charged for what she did, but I really hope she learned something from it. Story 4. I once had a young guy help out on my ranch who ended up doing something really upsetting. I sometimes let high school students work at my place to help them earn the community service hours they need for graduation. This one student needed a full day's worth of hours, and it was just a week before his deadline. His mom dropped him off early on a Saturday, and luckily I had enough work to keep him busy for 10 hours. He showed up at 6 a.m., clearly not happy to be there. I had him help with some animal care tasks. He mostly just held the animals while I did the more delicate work. Later, I gave him a simple job: sort the sheep into different groups. I marked each one with chalk. Red went to the big pasture, yellow to a smaller pasture with one male, and blue to a pen with another male. All he had to do was catch each one and put it in the right spot. There was one we called Felicia because she was really hard to deal with. She didn't like being handled, would run from you, and when you caught her, she'd fight hard to get away. No real reason, she was just like that. At some point, I guess the kid lost his patience. I wasn't nearby, but when I got back, I found out he had hit Felicia hard across the face. Hard enough that one of her teeth came out. And let me tell you, that takes a lot. I've seen sheep run full speed into solid wood and not lose a tooth. For him to knock one out like that meant he really used force. I was furious. I brought him inside, called his mom, and sent him home right away. I also refused to sign off on his hours. I had to take time out of my day to make sure Felicia wasn't hurt more than we thought. For the record, Felicia lived for another year and passed naturally of old age. She even calmed down a bit over time. That missing tooth didn't slow her down much either. Story 5. She was lazy, didn't do her job well, couldn't take any kind of feedback, and she kept eating my food. Anytime I brought something to eat, she'd stare at it and say things like, "Wow, that looks so good." I was the manager of a very small business, just me and 2 other employees, so we spent a lot of time together. She often said she didn't have money for groceries or to pay her bills, but at the same time, she talked about wanting another child. She was also in a relationship but was not being honest with her partner. I disliked working with her so much that it started giving me serious stress. She made many mistakes that affected our clients and made them upset with our business. Eventually, I told my boss it was either her or me. My boss didn't want to deal with the situation, so I decided to take a new job somewhere else. She was fired not long after, but by then it didn't matter. I wasn't coming back. Oh, and there were times she took medication during work hours, which I think was supposed to be taken at night, and she would completely zone out. She slept through the phone ringing and even through me calling her name because I needed help. Just thinking about all of it still makes me frustrated. Story 6. I work as an English teacher in Japan at elementary schools. The lessons are really basic, mostly just playing games in English with the kids. Part of my job is also to help train new teachers. One day, a new guy came over to my place so I could help him get started. I went through 4 weeks of lesson plans with him, step by step. I told him, just follow these exactly, and you'll do great. Once you get comfortable, you can start making your own plans. The next week, I got an email from my boss. All of his schools had complained that his lessons were too hard for the students. He had also been arguing with the homeroom teachers. So I set up another meeting with him to see what went wrong. I asked him what happened. He told me he forgot what I said and didn't write down enough notes. I asked, "Why didn't you just call me?" And he replied, "Oh yeah, maybe I should have done that." He also kept blaming the Japanese school system, saying that if they didn't like his lessons, it must be their fault. Now fast forward 3 months, and this kind of behavior hasn't stopped. I'm actually interviewing new candidates this weekend to replace him. Story 7. I wasn't a manager, but I still have a story to share. Back in college, I worked at Old Country Buffet as a cashier. It was great, free food, and I didn't have to cook. My roommate at the time wanted a job, so I helped him get an interview. He was hired and started the next day. I even trained him on the register. But the day after that, he didn't show up or call. He just quit. When I got home, I asked him why he didn't go to work. He said it was too hard. The thing is, that job was super easy. You just had to say, "Hi, welcome to OCB. How many in your group?" Then you'd punch the number into the register, read the total, take the money, and say goodbye. It really was good food. I still miss it. Story 8. This guy I used to work with was wild, unpredictable, and struggling with serious issues, including substance use. But despite all that, he worked incredibly hard and always kept the crew laughing. Unfortunately, things eventually got worse. He started acting out, losing control, and doing dangerous things like swinging on heavy machinery. Still, I liked the guy. I wasn't the one who made hiring or firing decisions. I was just the team leader. But I kept warning my boss over and over that we needed to let him go before he seriously hurt someone. He was unpredictable, and I was worried something bad would happen. In the end, he quit on his own. And honestly, I was relieved. We had mutual respect, and I was one of the few people he would actually listen to. That respect was really the only thing that made it possible to talk sense into him sometimes. The last I heard, he had posted a photo of himself sitting on the hood of his new car, holding something he definitely shouldn't have. Not long after, someone told me he had ended up in jail. Story 9. I used to be a manager at a fast food place. You think the hardest person to manage would be a teenager who didn't want to work or follow rules, but that wasn't the case. At the time, I was between 19 and 21 years old. Now I'm 24. We hired a new employee who didn't like the fact that I, someone younger than her, was in charge. She kept trying to ignore my role and refused to listen to anything I said. The thing is, I wasn't even strict. I didn't yell or micromanage. I was trained to be polite and respectful. I'd say something like, "Hey, do you want to check on the lobby?" Not demanding, just asking. She'd reply, "No, I don't," instead of something like, "Not really, but sure." So I changed how I asked. "I noticed a few dirty tables. Could you take care of them?" Even then, her attitude didn't improve. Eventually, I asked the owners if we could have a private talk with her about her behavior. In the meeting, she flat out said she would never take orders from a teenager. I told her I wasn't in high school anymore, and once she realized I was actually an adult, she completely changed her tone. Suddenly it was, "Oh, you are an adult? Well, that's different." But the damage was already done. Her attitude had been disrespectful from the start, and she refused to follow instructions. Plus, she didn't really do much work either. We let her go soon after. Story 10. You really can't let someone go just for being slow. I mean, technically you could, but it's not that simple. I manage a restaurant, and some people just naturally move at a slower pace. No matter how much training or practice they get, they still work like that. And on a busy cook line, that's a problem. You can coach them all day, and it won't change anything. There's one guy, let's call him Jordan. He moves at the pace of a snail. He often looks spaced out, and when he talks, it's so slow and flat you almost wonder if he's doing it on purpose. We serve Texas toast at our place. The process is super easy. Pick up a slice of bread, spread garlic butter on it, drop it on the flat top for 45 seconds, flip it for another 45 seconds, and it's done. That's it. I can get through a whole loaf in under 20 seconds. Just brush, drop, quick and smooth. But Jordan, he carefully spreads garlic butter on every little corner of the bread like he's painting a masterpiece. By the time one piece is done cooking, he's just getting the next one ready. I've shown him how to do it again and again. I say, "Jordan, just brush and drop, Then set the timer, flip, and serve." He always nods like he gets it, then goes right back to doing it his slow way. Even when he walks to the fridge to get cheese sticks for the fryer, it's like he's moving in slow motion. And he once spent 5 full minutes just plating a piece of chicken. He's not doing anything technically wrong. He follows the steps. He just does everything so slowly that it makes the job harder for everyone else. Most of the time, I just have him do dishes. But I can't really fire him because he's not breaking any rules. He's just doing the job in the least efficient way possible. Story 11. Back in grad school, I somehow ended up as the senior student in the lab, mainly because our professor didn't manage things well, and most of the other senior students had already quit. So along with doing my own research, I was basically running the lab too. Eventually, the professor brought in a new grad student. Let's call him Matt. Right away, it was clear that Matt didn't pay attention. When I gave him instructions or advice, he'd just stare blankly and walk away without saying anything. From the beginning, he caused constant problems. He ruined expensive equipment, like a set of special tweezers used for delicate sample work, by dumping them into a beaker, point first, damaging their tips. When I asked him why, he just shrugged and said nothing. He also used to bring in loud music that no one else liked and play it over the loudspeakers. Eventually, we got so fed up, we just removed the stereo. But the final straw came one morning when I walked into the lab and nearly crashed into a large gas cylinder sitting unsecured in the middle of the aisle. If you don't know, gas cylinders must be tied down or secured before the heavy metal safety cap is removed. If one of these falls and breaks the valve, it can basically turn into a rocket, fast enough to tear through walls and cause serious harm. And this one wasn't just any cylinder, it was filled with hydrogen, which is highly flammable. Not only was the cylinder standing freely with no safety support, but it had a gas regulator attached and a tube running to a nearby bench. Even worse, there was a proper tie-down just 1 foot away that he ignored. Once I calmed down, I carefully secured the cylinder and checked the label to confirm what was inside. When I saw it was hydrogen, my stomach dropped. If that cylinder had fallen, it could have injured or ended the lives of people throughout the building and caused a massive explosion. I was furious. I went to the next building to ask around. The other grad students were shocked too. One of them mentioned Matt had been talking about using hydrogen for an experiment. The amount he needed was very small. He could have easily used a tiny benchtop-sized cylinder designed for safer use. But no, he chose the biggest, most dangerous option. I started searching all over for him. I was seriously upset and wanted to confront him. I think someone warned him because he completely vanished. I couldn't find him anywhere. Eventually, I went to the professor and said it was either him or me. A week later, Matt left the program, and I never saw him again. Story 12. The worst employee I ever worked with was a girl who openly told me she hated waking up for work. To sleep longer in the morning, she would put on her work clothes the night before and sleep in them. Then she'd just roll out of bed and head straight to the office. She never wore regular pants, just thick leggings under heavy skirts. She lived with her parents and their 20 cats, so she was always covered in cat hair. She didn't brush her hair and always wore a beanie, even indoors. She was supposed to be a sales rep for our company, but her appearance and attitude weren't professional. Eventually, she was let go because of it. Story 13. I had an employee who would show up for work, then leave about an hour later. His average shift was maybe 2 hours, even though he was scheduled full-time. It was the night shift, so upper management either didn't believe me or just refused to let him go. They kept saying they couldn't find anyone to replace him. About 6 months earlier, the company had taken away my ability to fire employees. From that point on, any termination had to go through my boss first. However, I was still allowed to send someone home if things got really bad. I had to use that option a few times when this employee started yelling and using inappropriate language just because I asked him to do basic tasks. My boss wouldn't back me up or discipline him in any way, and that turned the job into a nightmare. Eventually, I quit. Not long after, they asked me to come back because none of the other managers wanted to work the night shift. Story 14. This time, I was the one dealing with a bad manager. I worked at a Thai restaurant. I didn't have a lot of experience, but most of the staff were from Thailand, and they needed someone at the front who could speak clear English. One slow day, a manager asked me, using broken English, to help cut some chicken. She just said to make the pieces medium thin, with little instruction. So I followed what the other cook was doing. Apparently, my pieces were too thick. The manager came back and instantly got upset. She started yelling that the chicken was too thick while holding raw pieces and throwing some into the sink and on the floor like a child having a tantrum. I noticed customers were starting to line up at the front, so I said we could talk about it later, but she blocked the doorway and kept yelling. She began pacing the kitchen, pulling at her hair with hands still covered in raw chicken, ignoring the customers out front. Eventually, she sent the other cook, who didn't speak much English, to the front and told me to stir a huge pot of soup for the rest of the day. While I stirred the soup, she kept walking around muttering angrily in a language I didn't understand. Then she looked at the chicken I had cut, turned to me, and said, "We can't let the boss see this." She then picked up pieces of chicken and started throwing them into the floor drain, then stepped on them to shove them down the grate. I told her to stop and act like an adult. She just screamed back to pot and kept stepping on the chicken. Eventually, the floor drain clogged, so she went to the sink and started pushing more chicken down that drain with her hand. The rest of the day, she kept walking up to me, holding pieces of chicken close to my face and yelling about how thick they were. She also kept swinging a cleaver around and muttering things like, "If the boss were here, he would fire you." Every time someone ordered a chicken dish, I heard her at the counter saying, "Sorry, the chicken is ugly." He cut it bad. I don't know why he's still working here. When the boss came back, here's what he saw. The soup I had been forced to stir was burnt, no food was ready, and the cook at the front was clearly struggling. I had tried several times to turn off the soup and help with dishes, but each time she'd come back yelling, "Back to pot," while waving a rice paddle at me. She tried to make it sound like it was our fault, but the boss checked the security footage. After watching it, he told the other cook and me we could leave early. As we walked out, we heard them arguing in another language. The next day, the health inspector showed up. He was hit with the smell of spoiled chicken and saw two workers pulling torn-up meat out of the floor and sink drains. He almost filed a report against the restaurant. Not long after that, the manager was fired. Story 15. I work at a dog daycare, and one of my coworkers is a serious problem. He often leaves the dogs unsupervised, lies when one of them gets hurt, and speaks rudely to clients. Recently, he even took money from the donation box meant for charity. One time, he left 3 hours early and left me alone in the building with 20 dogs. And that's just part of it. The strange thing is, our boss keeps protecting him. Every time something goes wrong, the boss says it's his last warning or final chance, but then it happens again, and nothing really changes. He'll mess up, cry, and somehow get out of trouble. The boss barely gives him any real consequences. I also think the boss takes advantage of him. He's extremely tidy and keeps the place looking perfect. He works a lot of extra hours, way past the normal limit, and I don't even think he realizes he's not getting paid for the overtime. He constantly praises the boss and tries to stay in their good graces. Story 16. I wasn't a manager, but at one point while working at an electronics retail store, I was respected like one because of how I handled things. There was a guy who had worked there for about 6 years. He was going to school at the time, so moving up in the company wasn't really an option for him. For a while, management loved him. He stood his ground with tough customers and was a strong salesman. But there was a problem. He got jealous whenever someone new came in and did a better job than him. It got so bad that he started training new employees the wrong way on purpose. That way, they wouldn't perform well. He could take their sales while making them look bad to the managers. Then I showed up. He tried to train me the wrong way too, but I always double-check things with other team members just to be sure. So eventually, I just pretend to listen to him, then go do things the right way. He didn't stop there. He even gave false info to experienced workers to steal their sales. He would say whatever it took, even to the new managers, just to make himself look better and get more sales. I had enough. During a big company meeting, I called him out in front of everyone. He was furious and wanted to start a fight. A week later, he quit. He told everyone it was because he finished school and got a better job. But a year later, he came back, broke and needing work again. Story 17. I used to work for an IT distribution company. A new guy was hired and assigned to work with me. He was from Sri Lanka and was in charge of international sales outside the EU. It was a well-paid job with big goals to meet. He sat right next to me, so I could clearly see both of his screens. On one screen, he was watching Tamil movies on YouTube. On the other, he had a messaging app open with about 14 conversations going on at once. Our sales numbers were visible on the screen, including his. He had a monthly profit goal of £30,000. In his first month, he made £35,000. In the second month, £40,000. But something didn't feel right. The CEO noticed it too and started looking into it. One day, the CEO walked over to the guy's desk, pulled out the power cables from his computer, handed him a termination letter, and said, "Leave now or I'll call the authorities." It turned out he had been sending real orders to businesses run by his friend around the world. These were small companies, many with no real financial history. He had changed their credit information to make it look like they were trustworthy clients and then shipped them expensive products that were never going to be paid for. Story 18. It's hard to say who was worse, a former coworker who had serious addiction issues, or the person I currently work with who just isn't good at the job. The person with the addiction problem used to show up late, about 10 to 15 minutes, and seemed clearly under the influence. He'd go across the street to meet someone, come back, head straight to the bathroom, and then barely function for the rest of his shift. He'd spend hours barely able to do anything. Almost every shift, he'd call the owner and break down crying over the phone. The owner was incredibly patient and kind, maybe too kind, because it took a really long time before anything was done about it. Now, the person I currently work with is just incredibly slow and unmotivated. He takes 2 to 3 times longer to complete tasks than anyone else. Yes, even the new hire we just brought in 3 weeks ago. He moves at the same slow pace, whether helping one customer or 10. The worst part? He's technically a manager. He has the keys, the alarm code, and thinks he's doing just fine. He's still here mainly because he and our boss met through a support group, and the boss feels bad for him. Because of that, he doesn't get held to the same standards as everyone else. I end up giving him manager shifts that will be better used for someone more capable, just to keep him from complaining. If he goes too long without getting a manager shift, he starts getting upset and emotional. He also believes that people dislike him because of his sexuality, but that's not the issue at all. No one cares about that. What we care about is the fact that he doesn't do his job well, slows everything down, and creates extra stress for everyone else. Story 19. I was a team leader at my job, and I was asked to mentor a new teammate, a very friendly and outgoing girl. Some of my friends were a little jealous that I got to be her mentor. She added me on Facebook within an hour of meeting me. We found out we had a few things in common, like being fans of Harry Potter and the English Premier League, though I support Chelsea and she liked Manchester United. I should have seen that as a sign. She often messaged me in the evenings to chat about hobbies, join me for lunch and coffee, and even hung out with me on weekends since she was new in town. But here was the issue. She really struggled with the work. Even after I explained something clearly, she would mess it up again on a nearly identical task. It felt like explaining 2 plus 3 is equal to 5, and then she couldn't figure out 3 plus 2. I started to feel like she may have been hired more for her appearance than her skills. I had to fix her work regularly. I told my manager, but he asked me to be patient and give her more time. Still, there was no improvement. She kept saying she couldn't focus because she missed her family. After 3 months, I felt like I had done enough. I suggested she be moved to the testing team instead. She was later transferred to another project closer to her hometown. After that, she stopped talking to me. Story 20. I once interviewed a girl for a job at a university dorm. She showed up wearing flip-flops, a tube top, and very short shorts. I immediately decided not to hire her because it looked extremely unprofessional. Since this job involved representing the dorms and interacting with students and their families, appearance and professionalism mattered. She accused me of rejecting her because of race. Yes, I'm white and she was black, but I explained clearly that it had nothing to do with that. My issue was with how she dressed for a job interview. It looked more like she was heading out for a party than applying for a job, and I didn't want that image tied to the university or my team. She got upset and left, especially after the other managers supported my decision. A year later, I was out sick when she reapplied, and someone else hired her. That manager tended to only hire people from a specific background, no matter their experience or how they presented themselves. It didn't take long before the problem started. The same person I originally turned down began skipping shifts, didn't arrange coverage, showed up acting out of it, or wore clothing that wasn't appropriate for a professional setting. She was fired in less than a month. Besides that situation, I've never had any major issues with people I hired. Story 21. I wasn't a manager, but I did help catch someone doing some serious wrong. Back in the 90s, I worked for a temp agency. They sent me to a business center that used to be a small mall, but had been turned into several businesses sharing things like a lunchroom and copier. I was hired as the tech person since none of the businesses were big enough to have their own IT staff. I was told a guy before me, let's call him Joe, left for a better job, and everyone was sad to see him go. In my first week, I started noticing some weird stuff. One of the business owners asked me to look at a computer that wasn't working. She looked really upset. She told me that the last time a computer acted like this, Joe told her it was broken and needed to be replaced. I took a look and fixed it in 5 minutes using a free antivirus program. Then I set up the rest of the computers in her office the same way. I asked her what happened to the broken computer. She said Joe took it home for parts. That week, I kept running into small problems that were easy to fix. But Joe had either taken forever to fix them or claimed the computers were beyond repair and needed replacing. He was also in charge of getting rid of the old machines. One of the business owners said Joe always spent full days working on one computer and even tried to convince the owner to give it to him so he could replace it for free. The owner didn't trust him and kept the machine. When I checked that computer, I saw why Joe wanted it. It was full of inappropriate content from the internet. I showed the owner, and Joe was officially no longer welcome there. It didn't end there. Joe had gone back to the temp agency and asked for his old job back, but I already had it. So he started showing up and bothering me, trying to get me to quit. I reported him, and the agency told him not to return. When he came back anyway, I told the building manager, who called the police. As soon as Joe saw the officers, he tried to run, but couldn't get out the back door because it had been secured after a break-in. He tried to resist being arrested, but they caught him. When they checked his record, they found out he was also wanted for other serious crimes. I told the officers about the time he spent working on one computer and decided to check it out again. Sure enough, hidden in the files, I found a partial record of what Joe had been doing while he worked there. I printed it out and gave it to the officers, promising to send more if I found anything. The next day, federal agents came and took the computer as evidence. Joe ended up going to prison for 5 years. Story 22. Oh man, I've seen my fair share of bad coworkers. There was one guy who borrowed the company car in the middle of the night. The car had the company logo on it, by the way. Yes, he had been drinking. Yes, he crashed it. And yes, he was arrested. Oh, and he wasn't alone. He had 3 other employees with him. They were all known for causing trouble. Back in college, I worked at a really poorly run pizza place. I didn't have a criminal record and actually showed up on time, so they made me a part-time manager. One night, I asked a coworker to close up. Turns out, that same night he was caught trying to break back in to steal cheese and meat. There are more stories, but I need time to remember all of them. Some of these people I didn't manage directly, they were just co-workers. A lot of them used to drink or use stuff on the job. Whether I was their manager or not, I've seen a lot of people who just didn't take work seriously. Story 23. I used to work in a call center when I was in my 20s. One of my coworkers was a woman in her 50s. We didn't get along that well, but it wasn't a big problem. She didn't get along with many people, so I wasn't alone. Later, I got promoted and became her manager. There were several managers, and we would switch teams every month or 2. She ended up on my first team when I was promoted. She didn't like any of the other managers, but since she had worked with me as a peer, I think she felt more comfortable being direct with me. The first time I sat down with her for a coaching session, she looked me straight in the eye and said, "I'll be honest, I don't respect people younger than me." I was a bit shocked she said that so openly. I replied politely, saying she was smart and capable, and I hoped she could work past that way of thinking. She was one of those people who knew, or thought she knew, all the workplace rules. She would use them to try to get her way, or sometimes just to make things harder for the company if she could find a loophole. She came across as very bitter. For example, once we had a candy bowl out as part of a fun little event. She filed a formal complaint with HR, saying we had discriminated against her because she was diabetic and there was nothing there for her. HR said we hadn't done anything wrong, but we added some sugar-free candy just in case. She never touched it. The job included commission, and one day she claimed it was illegal for us to pay employees less than what the company was earning from the client. She planned to take it further, so we sat her down and showed her the contract. It turned out the client paid us more to provide staff and less based on sales results, so we were actually paying employees more for sales than we were getting per sale. She had clearly misunderstood, and seeing her reaction when she realized she was wrong was unforgettable. She also tried to get others to support her claims that we were treating staff unfairly. But most of the team knew they were getting better perks than other departments and didn't want to stir up drama. They mostly ignored her. She also called out sick a lot, especially on Fridays, nice summer days, or when she was scheduled to work a weekend. She often said it was a migraine. After a while, I started to wonder how real they were. We couldn't prove anything, and even if we asked for a doctor's note, I'm sure her doctor would give her one easily. Whether real or not, the timing always seemed a little too convenient. To this day, when someone says they have a migraine, I remember her and quietly question it. After that first meeting, she was never openly rude to me again, but she kept playing little office politics games behind the scenes. She was always polite on the surface, but there was always something going on in the background. Funny enough, she made the best deviled eggs during our potlucks. I always complimented her on them and thanked her. I just hope she didn't mess with them, knowing how she liked to push buttons. Story 24. I supervise a group of writers who create content for websites. We work in an office setting, but we don't have a strict dress code. A collared shirt and jeans are fine, and on Fridays we're allowed to wear t-shirts. One of the writers on my team was nearly 9 years older than me, but I was his supervisor. Honestly, he was the most difficult person I've ever worked with. His desk was always a mess. He looked like he didn't take care of himself, and when he came over to talk to me, his breath was so strong I had to work hard not to flinch. It was bad enough to make me look away. As soon as he arrived at work, he would take off his shoes and walk around the office in just his socks like he owned the place. I probably could have ignored all of that if he at least did his job, but he never turned in his work. He spent long hours in the office, but didn't listen to me or the director and barely did anything. Most of the time, he was just on Twitter, probably working on some side project. We tried again and again to get him back on track, but nothing worked. Finally, after nearly 2 years, he was let go just last month. It was a long time coming. Story 25. While I was managing a room at a care center for people with developmental disabilities, I had some staff who didn't take their job seriously. Instead of working with the individuals, they would sit at a table with their backs to them and spend their time carefully coloring pictures. Then they would tape the artwork to the wall and pretend that the people we cared for, some of whom had physical challenges and didn't like being touched, had done the coloring themselves. Even the most capable person in our program, who actually enjoyed coloring, would scribble with a couple of colors and proudly ask for it to be put on the fridge. That's what real participation looked like. The program director saw through what was going on and called it out. But when I told the staff that coloring was no longer allowed in the room, they acted like I was being unreasonable. Even after I explained that it was obvious the individuals weren't the ones doing the art, the staff kept trying to sneak crayons into the room whenever I wasn't around. Story 26. I used to work with a guy who was in an open relationship and loved to talk about it, constantly. No matter what the conversation was, he would somehow bring up his multiple girlfriends. One day, an elderly man came into the store to buy candy for his wife. It was their 47th wedding anniversary, and he was clearly proud of their long and loving relationship. He said a lot of kind things about his wife. Instead of just being polite, my coworker said, "Oh, that's great. I have an anniversary this week too, with one of my girlfriends. I have two, and they both know about each other." It completely changed the mood. Another manager once asked him why he brought it up so often. He said he thought it made him seem more impressive to other men. He also made a lot of people uncomfortable. He would comment on my appearance, like saying I was a little overweight or mentioning my purple hair, and then tell me that most of his girlfriends had the same traits. It felt like he was trying to suggest I should be part of his dating life. It was uncomfortable, but not quite enough for anyone to officially report him. On top of all that, he wasn't even good at his job. He eventually got fired for not showing up to work. Story 27. I'm currently dealing with the most difficult coworker I've ever had. I'm not a manager, but I'm a crew leader. We do mostly hands-on work, plus a bit of cleaning. This person has done everything possible to avoid doing any physical labor, so we had her focus on cleaning tasks. The problem? Those cleaning tasks are usually done during night shifts, and she says she can't work nights because they cause her to have anxiety. So not only does she avoid cleaning tasks, but she also avoids helping with the hands-on work. She says she prefers doing maintenance work instead of cleaning, but anytime we try to get her involved in those tasks, she disappears and finds ways to avoid it. Lately, she's been calling in sick a lot. Last month alone, she missed 8 days, and when you add that to her days off, she was gone more than she was here. She claims she's stressed, but she barely does anything during the day. She also constantly complains, spreads negativity, and talks down to me. Our crew and the people who oversee our work have actually complimented how well we're doing, so it's not like we're falling behind. But she's creating a very toxic environment for everyone, not just our team, but others in the facility too. What makes it worse is that she's apparently trying to get me fired. People who've talked to her have warned me. I've never been mean to her, but one day, she suddenly snapped, said I was a bad leader, and accused me of not communicating. What she really wants is someone to guide her every move, but our team doesn't need to be micromanaged, and I've got other responsibilities. Now she's writing emails to our supervisor and to the person in charge of our site, making complaints about me. It's honestly unbelievable. Even people who worked with her last year are shocked she was hired back. I tried to work around her issues and keep things moving, but now she won't even speak to me. The final straw was when she called in sick, but I heard from a coworker that she invited them to a party that same day. I sent an email to our supervisor saying we need to talk about her. I also plan to contact HR to see if there's any way to either let her go or at least make sure she doesn't come back next season. Since this is a government job, the process is long and difficult, so I want to make sure I handle everything the right way. If for some reason she returns next season, I'll be leaving, and so will another crew member. She's caused a lot of stress, and it's affecting everyone. Our supervisor and the higher-ups have had several meetings with her, but nothing has changed. I may have to take it even higher or go directly to HR. I just hope they take action before this gets worse. Story 28. I wasn't a manager at the time, but this story is definitely worth sharing. I worked the night shift at a 24-hour convenience store with a deli. I was handling food prep in the back while my coworker worked the register. Besides ringing up customers, her job was to clean the store and make fresh coffee. She didn't do any of that. All she did during her shift was eat. And not just a little. She would eat so much she'd feel sick, go to the bathroom, then come back and eat more. She told everyone she was pregnant and said that's why she was always hungry and feeling sick. But about a week after claiming to be 5 months along, she left the bathroom in a terrible state. There was a mess everywhere, on the toilet seat floor, and even the toilet paper holder. When I asked her to clean it, she refused, saying she was too upset because she found out she wasn't actually pregnant. Side note, her doctor had told her after her first missed period that she wasn't pregnant. He said it could be due to her weight or a medical condition, but she didn't believe him and refused further testing. One night while I was making sandwiches, she came up behind me and passed gas, laughed, and walked away. She did it again and again. After the third time, I told her, if you have an accident, I won't feel bad. I'll just laugh. And, well, she did. It wasn't just a little accident either. As she ran to the bathroom, I couldn't help but notice the mess showing through her leggings. It was hard not to laugh, honestly. While she was in the bathroom, I covered the register and helped a few customers. She came out later and asked me to call someone from the morning shift to come in early so she could go home. Someone agreed to come in within the hour. Until then, she stood at the counter talking to the regular truckers who stopped in for their 3 a.m. coffee. One of them asked how she was doing, and she said, "Not so great. I had an accident." He looked her in the eye and replied, "That's not something you should share with people." She didn't last much longer after that. She kept getting in trouble for not doing any of her assigned cleaning or prep tasks, and eventually, after an argument with a boss, she walked out and never came back. Story 29. When I was working as a retail sales manager, we had a couple who worked together in the same department. It wasn't the best hiring decision, but I didn't have the authority to change it. Anyway, they were caught taking cash from customers in exchange for store items, but instead of ringing the sales up, they kept the money and gave the items away like they were paid for. They were a friendly older couple who made it seem like they were just helping people get a great deal. The customers had no idea the items were being stolen. That part was already bad, but there was more. The woman would host what she called adult product parties at her house. They were like those home parties for kitchenware or storage containers, except the items were adult-themed. The issue was she started inviting customers from our store to these events. We worked in a craft and framing store, located in a very conservative area. People would come in to get photos of their kids, pets, weddings, and religious artwork framed, and she would try to pitch them her side business. It didn't go over well. Her name was Bobby, but she would constantly type booby by mistake on work orders. It gave us a laugh, but she was clearly not focused. The man was also a problem. He wasn't very efficient, took too many breaks, and often slowed things down. But he always showed up on time and could sell well, so management let things slide. One day, he brought chili to work for everyone to try. Later, we found out it had been seasoned with something it definitely shouldn't have been. No one got hurt, thankfully, but it was clearly inappropriate. Eventually, corporate figured out the couple was stealing. That was the final straw. Loss prevention got involved. All of us had to write up statements about the strange and unprofessional things we had seen them do. The loss prevention officer who came in was recovering from an injury and using crutches. At one point, he left the room where he was interviewing the couple and accidentally left the folder with all our signed statements on the table. The couple read everything, including the names of who had written what. It was a complete disaster. There was even more chaos around them, but long story short, this couple caused nothing but trouble. After they left, it was the only time we lost employees and actually saw productivity increase. Usually when someone quits or is fired, it slows things down. Not this time. Story 30. I was the plant manager at a manufacturing facility with nearly 500 people working on the floor. Our workforce was steady, but during the summer, we'd hire temporary workers or students to help while full-time staff took time off. We hired a young guy full-time. He was the son of a friend of one of our shop foremen. I always encouraged the team to take the 3-month evaluation period seriously. It's not that we couldn't let someone go after that, but it's much easier if things are handled early. Every time I asked how the new hire was doing, I was told, "He's doing great." But one day, as I was walking through the plant, one of our skilled tradesmen, an experienced millwright from England, pulled me aside. He told me that he had seen the young worker struggling and had offered some advice. The young guy's response, "Why don't you just leave me alone and mind your own business?" The real words were more aggressive, but you get the idea. I called him into my office, along with the foreman. I explained that he had a great opportunity ahead of him. He could earn a full apprenticeship and become a skilled CNC machinist if that's what he wanted. But his attitude had to improve. This was 2 months in. After that, we had weekly check-ins. But the reports kept coming in. He was rude, uncooperative, and argued with others. The final straw came when he told the person who operated the yard crane and large forklifts that they didn't know how to do their job. That was it. With just 1 week left in his probation period, we let him go. Later, the foreman told me the family was upset. They believed we had some kind of plan to work young people hard for 3 months and then fire them so we wouldn't have to pay any extra benefits. So, I still wonder how people like that turn out in the long run. Story 31. I own a construction company, and one day I went to check in on one of our job sites. We had just hired a new young guy. It was his first day. He was a big, strong guy, so I wanted to see if he could actually put in the work. As soon as I walked into the house we were remodeling, my foreman pulled me aside. He told me this new guy was already driving him crazy. Apparently, the guy had asked him what he was doing and why he wasn't helping take out trash bags. That rubbed me the wrong way immediately. My foreman has been with me for years. He works harder than most. To make things worse, the guy had already taken about 5 smoke breaks, and it had only been 2 hours. The foreman knew I was stopping by, so he waited for me to handle it. I went over to the staircase where the new guy was putting down carpet protection, a plastic film we use to keep stairs and floors clean. He looked frustrated, out of breath, and annoyed like the job was too much for him. Normally I'm patient, but this really bothered me. I lost my cool a little and said, "What's got you so upset? You're just putting plastic on the stairs while 2 guys above you are hauling in heavy lumber." He answered, "It's nothing, man. This stuff is just annoying to work with. Can I take a cigarette break when I'm done?" That was all I needed to hear. I didn't bring him back after that day. It's wild to me. This guy was built like a tank. He had the strength to be a great worker and could have gotten as many hours as he wanted if he just put in the effort. But on my job sites, I don't tolerate laziness or a bad attitude. If you want to earn good money, you've got to put in good work. I was lucky growing up. My dad was one of the top builders in our area. He was tough and made me work for everything. I didn't get handed anything. Because of that, I grew up understanding the value of hard work. It's just frustrating to see how some people throw away opportunity because they don't want to try. Story 32. She really wanted to be part of all the exciting new projects at work, especially the ones focused on creating new ideas. The problem was she didn't really know how to do the work, and she didn't want help or training because she was trying to prove she could do it all on her own. So instead of being helpful, she just slowed everyone else down. At the same time, she ignored some of the more routine but very important parts of her job. One of those tasks was making sure we met all our responsibilities in a difficult licensing program involving a big, well-known company that was both a business partner and a competitor. Let's just say their brand name reminded people of fruit. We didn't realize how badly she had dropped the ball until about a year after she left the company. That same big name company used her mistakes as a key point during a legal disagreement with us. Because of her oversight, we ended up losing a large amount in sales, had to rework major parts of our systems, gave up on a lawsuit that might have earned us a lot of money, and damaged our relationship with that company. Damage we still feel even years later. She wasn't the only reason all of that happened, not by a long shot. But when her mistakes came to light, we knew we couldn't keep fighting. Up until that moment, we had done everything right, but now we had a serious weakness. If she had still been with the company at the time, we likely would have let her go because of it. Also, she pronounced words like ancient and especially in very odd ways. It wasn't a big deal, but once you heard it, it was hard to unhear. Story 33. I'm not the boss, but my dad is, and these are some wild stories from his office. One time, a woman at his office was taking something she wasn't supposed to during work hours while eating a fast food burger. Another employee, who already didn't get along with her, reported it to a supervisor. When the supervisor came over to ask what was going on, she loudly said, "I'm really enjoying this burger, boss, and once I'm done, I'm going to handle that other person." That was it. She was let go right away. Another time, one of the supervisors noticed some money was missing or there were strange charges on a company card. When he looked into it, he found that a large amount of company data had been moved to a personal computer and copied to an external hard drive. My dad, who is the CEO, and the supervisor thought maybe the guy was new and just didn't understand the rules. But instead of explaining anything, the guy got angry and acted like he wanted to start a fight. One of the bosses is a really strong guy with martial arts training, so they convinced the employee to calm down and go talk to the police instead. There are a lot more stories like this my dad has told me over the years, but these are some of the most unbelievable. Story 34. Some people at work just can't stand that their manager is younger and a woman. But the truth is, we all make our own choices. They wanted to look cool, show up late, and do the bare minimum. I wanted to grow in my career. I came to work on time, treated my boss with respect, finished every task I was given, and made sure my work was not just okay, but excellent. That's why I got promoted. So don't go around saying I only got ahead for the wrong reasons. And I really don't want to hear that "I'm older than you" excuse. Being older doesn't mean you automatically get to be in charge, especially when you're not good at your job. A lot of people who are the oldest in their families think they should always be in charge, just because they're used to getting more respect at home. But that's not how the real world works. Every year, new people graduate, and many of them have better skills, better work habits, or simply care more about doing a good job. Just being older isn't something to brag about. Time passing doesn't earn you rewards. You have to actually earn your place. Story 35. I'm not a manager, but I've definitely worked with some strange people. I used to work at a bingo hall in the UK, and that place had some characters. There was one guy who was probably the slowest and most confused worker I've ever met. He barely spoke, just one word at a time, and constantly flicked his hair like one of those goth kids from South Park. Sunday nights were our busiest, and I worked in the kitchen. One person would always come in early to prep everything before we started serving food. One night, it was this guy's turn. My friend and I came in about 45 minutes after his shift had started. As we walked past the kitchen, we noticed all the lights were still off. We thought, "Oh no, maybe he didn't show up." But when we got down there, we saw he was there, setting up in complete darkness. Turns out he couldn't figure out how to turn the lights on. The switch was right next to the door. He also kept disappearing to the back a lot. Someone followed him once and said they suspected he was doing something shady in the bathroom. He didn't pass his probation period, which wasn't surprising. There was another guy I worked with who, about a year after I left, stole a bunch of money from the company, the staff, and even some customers. He got suspended, then quit the next day and found a new job. But that didn't last long. His new boss happened to be related to one of our former coworkers, and once they found out the real reason he left our place, he was out of that job too. I've got plenty more stories from that bingo hall. It was definitely an interesting place to work. Story 36. Tammy has become somewhat of a legend at the restaurant I help manage. From her first day, she seemed to dislike me just because I was younger, 13 years younger to be exact, and happened to be her supervisor. She claimed she used to be a manager at an aerospace company, but that turned out to be made up. It was actually her parole officer who required her to get a job, and working in food service was the only position she could find. Tammy had a strong habit of stepping out for smoke breaks, so often that it became a problem. She would pretend to be taking out the trash every 10 to 15 minutes just to sneak a cigarette. I'd catch her outside, and even though there would be a cloud of smoke above her and a cigarette in her hand, she'd still deny it like nothing happened. She also made inappropriate comments from time to time. For example, she would say things about my appearance, ask personal questions about when I was planning to have children, and then follow it up with rude comments if my answer wasn't what she wanted to hear. It made things very uncomfortable. Tammy often spent her shifts arguing over text with her husband and ignoring her responsibilities during our busiest hours. Even when I told her to stop, she kept finding sneaky ways to use her phone while on the clock. Then one day, she showed up nearly 2 hours late and clearly wasn't herself. She was crying off and on, talking strangely, and kept running to the restroom every few minutes. When we asked her what was going on, she blamed her medication. We sent her home. But the next day, she showed up in the same condition. We sent her home again. Later, we found out she had been using substances during her shift and was arrested that night for driving under the influence. She also had some other legal problems, which explained a lot. While we don't like to speak badly about others, it's safe to say everyone at the restaurant felt a little relieved when she didn't return. She caused a lot of stress, and it was hard to manage the team with her around. Story 37. There was a woman I worked with briefly who moved up incredibly fast. She was hired, promoted 2 weeks later, and then again just 2 weeks after that. Within 3 months, she became the assistant to the VP of marketing. Instead of working, she spent her time seeking favor with managers. If she wasn't doing that, she'd be flaunting her new status. I don't ever remember seeing her actually do the work. It quickly became obvious that her rapid promotions weren't due to performance. People often joked that if you wanted to find her or one of the managers she was close with, you'd look in hidden spots like supply closets or empty offices. The rumor was she was using personal connections with supervisors to climb the ladder fast. Someone even filed a formal complaint about what was going on, but by the time the complaint reached HR, she had already become too influential at the company. I'm not sure what happened after that. I left about 3 months after she made her exit. Story 38. 2 workers stand out in my memory. The first guy would disappear for hours during the day and then come back at the end of his shift, sweaty and acting strangely. After a few weeks, I decided to quietly follow his routine to figure out what was going on. Our company owns a few large buildings in the city, and some of them are completely empty. It turns out he was sneaking into the empty ones, cutting out small copper pipes, stuffing them into his tool bag, and riding his bike to a nearby scrap shop. Then he'd come back looking like he had a lot of energy, probably from something he took. That alone was bad enough, but when I checked the security cameras, I saw that he was also coming to the buildings at night, taking out even bigger pieces of copper pipe. The second guy had a different issue. He drank a lot. He would sleep in the buildings overnight and show up in the morning smelling like alcohol. What made it worse was that he never took responsibility for anything. Anytime he messed something up, he blamed someone else or said the tools were broken. Since he never admitted when he was wrong, he kept making the same mistakes over and over again, and the rest of us had to clean up after him. I can't stand people who can't admit their mistakes. Story 39. Government workers. I was leading a big project for the local health department. My team included hired contractors, nurses, and government staff. The contractors were great. They were focused, organized, and helpful because they knew their jobs depended on doing things well. The nurses were also amazing. They understood how important this project was to their work and wanted to help. But the government workers? They were the complete opposite. They knew I couldn't fire them, and my boss wouldn't either, so they just did whatever they wanted. I would give them tasks, and they simply wouldn't do them. These were people making 6-figure salaries, but many of them just sat at their desks browsing the internet all day. One even spent about 3 months planning a vacation during work hours right in front of everyone. They wouldn't turn in reports, took time off whenever they felt like it, came and went as they pleased, and refused to go to meetings or training. For 2 years, half the team might as well have not shown up at all. Because of that, the contractors and nurses had to do twice as much work. Thankfully, I had some smart and hardworking people in the group, and we finished the project ahead of schedule and under budget. But I made myself a promise. I'll never work with government office staff again. Story 40. I was in university and working a part-time job at a gas station. I worked as a cashier. There were also workers outside who filled gas and cleaned windshields. One of those guys borrowed a small car from the owner, one of those tiny two-seaters. He accidentally scratched one of the wheels. Instead of reporting it and letting insurance handle it, he went out at night, found a similar car, put it on blocks, and stole its wheels. The next day, the owner noticed that his car suddenly had completely different wheels. He asked the guy what happened, and the guy replied, "I don't know what you're talking about. These wheels are better than your old ones." He was fired immediately. A few months later, he ended up in jail for unrelated charges. I actually saw him once after all that. He pretended he didn't even know me.